Okay, now we have gone through all 4 steps in the writing process, and we have done practice with each of those steps. We have also gone through several grammar lessons and done practice with each of those. So now we're moving on to rhetorical modes. And over the next 5 modules, we're going to look at different rhetorical modes. And a rhetorical mode is just a method of writing. And here are the 5 methods of writing we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about definition, compare and contrast, process, exemplification, and finally argument. In this video, we're going to start discussing definition. Now, a definition paragraph is one that starts with a 1-sentence definition. That sentence is then the topic sentence for that paragraph. And all of the supporting points then that follow in that paragraph help to reinforce that definition. Now, this definition that we're using as our topic sentence does not come from the dictionary. We are never going to use a reference source like a dictionary, an encyclopedia. We're not going to Google it. We're not going to do any of those things to provide this definition. This is our definition. We're going to write this definition. Now, you may have to do some research and educate yourself on the topic before you can define the term. But the topic sentence itself does not come directly from another source. This is supposed to be your definition. Now, after discussing the meaning of the term, we're going to provide as many examples and details, good specific details, to help clarify our point. Now, I have an example here. This is not an entire paragraph, but this begins to show you how we use definition. Devon is such an intellectual. An intellectual is a person who researches the answers to life's problems. So you see here, here's our topic sentence. This is our definition sentence because we're defining intellectual in 1 sentence. Devon is always reading books about important issues like climate change. He researches online and writes essays about possible solutions. So now we've given good specific examples like he reads about climate change. He researches online. He writes essays about possible solutions to these problems. All of this helped to bolster our definition of intellectual. Now, the more specific examples and specific details we use, the more convincing our definition is going to be. And you want to make sure to give specific examples because those will stick in the mind of your reader. That's what your reader will remember. Using general observations is not very memorable. It's not very convincing. Of course, sometimes we can support a definition by telling what it does not mean. And this is when we use contrast. Using contrast means telling our reader what the term does not mean or distinguishing it from another term with which it is sometimes confused. So I'm going to give you 2 more examples, each using contrast in a different way. The first example, Hillary, on the other hand, is definitely not an intellectual. Whenever important issues come up in conversation, she dismissively says, "Ignorance is bliss." Okay, so in this example, we're seeing what intellectual does not mean. We're using the specific example of Hillary and how she is very dismissive of discussing important issues. Now, here's another example of how contrast can work. Sometimes we can distinguish between our term and a term with which it is related or it can be confused with. Brian reads all of the time like Devon, but he is a bookworm, not an intellectual. He reads fantasy novels like The Hobbit and A Game of Thrones, which are entertaining but not enlightening. So again, this is contrast because we're defining intellectual by showing you how it is different from the term bookworm. Sometimes the term bookworm and intellectual might be confused with one another, but this specific example of talking about Brian shows how bookworm and intellectual are actually 2 different things. So that is also how to use contrast. Now, in the next video, we will look at how to use the writing process, those 4 steps we've been practicing, in order to write a definition paragraph.